I can't wait for this interview. Admiral Mike LeFever is here, and we're going to be talking violence prevention from military to civilian. Let's get started.
From the front lines of violence prevention, digging into the details that matter. Get ready for a 15-minute fast-paced information download that will prepare you to ask the critical question. When disaster strikes, are we good? Now, here's Jim Bennett.
Welcome to Are We Good? So excited about today. We have Vice Admiral Mike LeFever with us. Vice Admiral Mike LeFever joins us after an illustrious 38-year naval career beginning at the United States Naval Academy, including multiple ship commands and joint task force leadership. Currently serving as Executive Vice President for National Security at Concentric, a risk management consultancy. Mike's distinguished military service culminated as Director of Strategic Operational Planning at the National Counterterrorism Center, where he applied his expertise in building high-performance teams across complex international environments. Admiral, welcome.
Jim, thanks. It's great to be a part of the show.
Oh, that's super. Well, love having you on it. And for everyone else, that is the smallest of a snippet of Mike's background, and you can just Google it. And he has just an incredible history. And I met Mike about a year ago. We were both at a conference, and we had dinner, and we were talking. And I wish my show was something completely different in the sense of I could just talk Navy, or because my dad was a Navy pilot. So I was just like drooling as we were talking, listening to stories. And I know I need to stay on track, but Mike, I gotta ask you, first question though. And I know it's not possible to say what's the number one, but let's just say the top 10, give me one of your most favorite assignments, just so people can kind of get to know you and know a little bit about you.
Yeah. Anytime you're in command, so command of a ship, command of a squadron, was on Stennis, had command of a strike group, and command of a joint task force. Probably personally and professionally, the most rewarding experience was when leading the earthquake relief effort in 2005 in Pakistan. To be responsible for saving tens of thousands of people's lives, it was quite an event. And then, then no kind goes unpunished. I got sent back to Pakistan as the commander of the Defense Representative Pakistan, and so for 3 years, interacting and being a part of writing history, all the way up and culminating with the Bin Laden raid, was just there's so many that it's kind of like you want to cherry pick each one because there's
Right.
so much to be able to, working with great people and great mission and writing history rather than reading about it. It's pretty humbling.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
yeah,
Well, and thinking about when we think military, we think obviously warfare and protecting America, right? And
yeah,
and here you were, like you said, you're saving lives, and not that our actions as
yeah,
military don't save lives, they do.
yeah,
That's why we do what we do. But this was specifically identified as a life-saving support measure
yeah.
for the Pakistani people, and I remember listening to your stories. This is for everyone. If you're at a conference with Mike, do everything you can to say, "Hey, are you free for dinner tonight?" Because it's awesome to listen to. Okay,
Yeah.
so
I used
let's.
to talk about it. It's funny. I'd said, I planned for this strike group with my Marines, 5,500 Marines and sailors and ships and aircraft and air wing. And it was
Yeah,
like, I said, I planned for urban renewal in a different sense. I was figuring out how to
yeah,
destroy, targets. Now here I am building and saving lives. It was, wow. It was fun,
yeah. I
incredibly
mean,
fun,
actually,
incredibly
just
humbling.
yeah. I can only imagine. I don't want to, go on a whole different path here, but just a lot of that leadership, the management of it. I'm sure was actually something you could transition from the more warfare, defensive or offensive acts to now this humanitarian thing. But I think a lot of the
Yeah.
leadership principles remain the same, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty universal. That's what's so fun about it. That's what I found, even in the public sectors, be it in the Navy and joint warfare to the private sector, those same principles of take care of people, everything else takes care of itself, and how you lead and so
Yeah.
forth, all go back and forth pretty easily. It's really kind of
Absolutely.
fun.
Well,
Yeah.
that actually kind of takes us into my first official question here. So now that you're dealing with, and you have been dealing with, threats in the private industry and working with different organizations, how has your transition from military to civilian life, obviously, this is what we're talking about here, how has your approach had to evolve from being a military commander to
Mhm.
now all of a sudden you're dealing with private sector organizations?
Jim, that's a great question. I think, what I grounded on is the background that we learned, influenced by all those years, those skills and tactics and techniques and procedures that we used in contested areas, even
Yeah,
conflict zones, and how do you take that from a security and adopt it to the environment that you're working in? And I
yeah,
think I think that's probably the key parts. One is obviously in a military environment, a war zone, you're kind of in charge, large and in charge, and you can control the environment around you.
right.
Here is, kind of the background, the intelligence, the ability to really recognize situations and to be able to protect your principles. And how do you do that without bringing, we found, obviously in convoys or something, you kind of be a magnet. And so I think what I tried to do is kind of blend in with the noise. Don't make yourself stand out as a possible, oh, who is that person? Why are they having this kind of
Right.
entourage or whatever, or surrounded by these people? And it just brings attention to you. And so what we find is being able to do that.
Yeah,
And then I think
absolutely.
there was this famous admiral that says, you know, a good ship handler doesn't have to do great skills, to be a great ship handler, or use them to get out of tragedy. And
Right.
so I think that's also another thing is that planning, that rehearsal, and understanding the environment they're going into, and
Yeah.
being able to shift if you need to get them out of that environment, or don't put them in an environment that would cause a significant event to occur or high profile or what have you. And so it's kind of that mix and blend. How do you shape that environment, or how do you understand the environment to make sure you're operating safely in it?
Yeah, absolutely. My show isn't about leadership, but there's a component of preventing violence that is leadership. Certainly, whether
Right.
it's the leadership from the lowest levels in the organization that's responsible for the safety of one person, two people, a particular object, technology, whatever, all the way to the CEO, who may not have their fingers on the pulse of everything security, violence prevention, because they have those in their organization that are responsible for that. But they have to be able to have a general knowledge from a leadership standpoint. Can you just give us a couple of thoughts of how best to lead people in the sense of you think of Pakistan. While I'm sure there might have been a couple opportunities you found 1 second to go and like help some of the crew do something, right? But ultimately you had to be able to lead, and people didn't
Yeah.
expect that Mike's unloading boxes of rations. As much
Good,
as you
great.
may want to be like, I want to just do something normal for 1 second there.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
lead? I mean, just give me a couple of thoughts on just leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a great, and I think and for many of the folks too in the security details, because it is a small team. And so I rely a lot on kind of the operations that we did, or even joint special operations. And the idea is a small team, you're all trusted, which
Yeah,
is a huge factor of it. You all know what the mission is, so there's a common purpose, a common sense of what
right.
we're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
And then the important thing, I think, is you have to share that information and intent.
yeah,
What's that? it- and it can be risky, but you need to share all that information. You give the intent, we used to call it commander's intent. What is it that we wanted to see? What does right look like? How are we going to end this? And then, like you said, at the level of leadership, depending on where you are, then it's the empowerment of people. trust them that you've done your training, you've done the rehearsals, you've given them the information, and you've given them that great guidance and clear goals and principles, and then let them go, because they don't have a chance to come back to you to ask in the moment when they have to make split decisions about what they're going to do or what the environment they're in. So that empowerment and that trust that you build over time, and then let your team. I always found out that if I tried to micromanage, I hated being micromanaged. That was the worst thing to do. Is like, oh boy, then I was going to screw it up. In fact, letting those great men and women exercise for you and given their great experience to be
Yeah.
able to let go. And you're right. At the level that I was at, I was a 1-star, leading the whole U.S. military relief effort in Pakistan of over 1,500 people as it grew to
Yeah.
hospitals and helicopters. Nothing I'd ever planned for, but those elements of trusting the people, providing that strategic guidance, sharing the information and intelligence, being able to translate the meetings that I had with the president and the national security staff and the commanders that I had, to
Yeah.
be able to translate to that so that they could understand how they fit into the big picture, the why. Why are we there? Why, the middle of nowhere,
Right.
sleeping out of a tent in the middle of the Himalayas with winter coming, and just, the some unique conditions,
Right.
but then put it in perspective about saving lives and being a part of something huge, which was overwhelming at times. To
Right.
feel that sense of pride, building shelters for people that had lost everything, schools for
Yeah.
children to go back to, try to bring normalcy to this environment that was devastating. 80,000 dead, 180,000 injured,
Eh,
3.5
yeah.
million people homeless, winter coming, and you're kind of like, holy cow.
Yeah.
And then you're working in an environment where there was terrorist training camps up in the area that we just read about in the news between Pakistan and India. In
Yeah.
that particular area of Kashmir and outside Jammu Kashmir, in the Northwest Frontier Province, now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we were
Okay.
operating along that line of control, and it was pretty fascinating, with
Wow.
that, security environment that we had to watch. We were on a humanitarian mission. How do you prepare for that? How do you present yourselves without how do you protect yourselves in that environment that was so exposed? Winning hearts
Yeah.
and minds and being able to move forward. So it was quite an epic event. It was so humbling to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean that's just when I think about it, and then I kind of translate it to like what does that mean to the civilian world, and
Yeah,
and there's so many similarities in the sense of you're trying to do your
right.
mission, but you also have these elements that are out there that are
Yes.
interrupting it, preventing it, disturbing your good progress forward. Because like you were saying, there was these elements out
Yeah.
there that weren't pro help us, right? I mean, they were there to stop you
Right.
and to cause
Good.
havoc and
Yep.
cause more turmoil in the country. And I mean, am I wrong? But I think we can even see that in civilian world where the good we're doing gets
Absolutely.
interrupted. And
Absolutely. And the factors that affect you, everybody think it would be the external factors. Well, that was part of it, but also the internal factors, like even inside the embassy, even inside our own organization, the differences of opinion and different people from different organizations and agencies and the UN and then the Pakistan military and the government. There's so many factors that are in play, and
yeah,
that that ability for the security teams that we're talking to today is kind of that idea of being able to see clearly what it was. And I was given two big things. It was kind of like, hey, provide humanitarian assistance and improve U.S. PAC relations. But it was
hmm
so pressing in that it gave you a mission to focus on. And
yeah,
when things got, and they're sometimes disturbed, like, oh, that's not yours, and you kind of diffuse it a little and be
right,
dispassionate about it and say, hey, we're here about saving lives. So let's figure out how best we can operate. And so for
yeah,
the security teams, it's about, hey, we're here to make the principal look good. How is
right,
it that we work together internally and externally with all the different environments to
yeah,
be able to ensure that success of that mission, so to speak? And
yeah,
and then and then one of the big things we do, of course, is after action reviews. We practice, we rehearse the mission, we execute, and then we immediately do an after action. because the organizations that do that, I find, really succeed. Just, hey, what went well?
Yeah.
What could we improve on? Boy, what happened we didn't even think about? So that it's a learning organization, but having that, and like you said, creating that environment for that lowest person,
Yeah.
that, you know, that private was on the security post in the middle of the Himalayas,
Right.
to me, the one-star admiral or even the ambassador.
Yeah.
And how does that, to be able to capture that in a dispassionate, no shame or blame, but how to understand what happened and why, and then how do we continually make sure we're on the mark, we're doing that improvement, whether it's that 1% every day or whatever, to be able to not be complacent and to be after it and to continually learn from what's going on. And you see in today's technology, oh my goodness, what the teams are being confronted with, whether it's drones or unmanned vehicles or surveillance or
Yeah.
whatever, that's now has gone to a new level, along with AI, with helping somebody get like, oh, how can I disrupt this security team and their arrival? It's fascinating now to really be dialed in and constantly refresh and constantly look at and being current.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just about out of time on this part, but we're going to go into the squad room here because there's a lot more to talk about. But
Yeah, there is.
but one of the things I'm pulling so much. Again, we could go on for hours just on what you've said right now because I'd like to dissect it. But I want to dissect one little quick part because
Okay.
to me it's relevant. It's I mean all of it's very relevant, but this
Yeah.
is really relevant to leaders out there again at all levels is your resounding theme of clarity of mission to your teams. That is
Yeah.
it. Let's wrap up this segment just with a comment on that because that is so critical. Whether you're the CEO or you're whatever level of the organization you're leading, especially in your security mission, talk about clarity.
Yeah, I think clarity of mission, clear goals and mission set is so important because it sets the tone. It sets the overarching, the end state or the end game, the strategic end state is what is we focused on. And then we can rally around. We have some things in the military we call supported and supporting. And so the idea is that, okay, we're supporting this element to be able to move forward. How do we pull our resources to be able to do that? But the idea to communicate to the team that shared information, that shared awareness, that shared intent, and then the let them go because they understand the why. They've been given that wonderful training that you dealt with. You've operated with it, you rehearsed it, you drilled it, you've practiced it, you've tabletopped, you did it in real life scenarios. And now it's game on. And so you had ability to talk about it, talk through what might happen, red team it, go execute, and then go back and take a look at, gosh, what can we even do to be even more refine it and be that precise team of high performance to be able to execute the mission.
Yeah.
That clarity of goals and principles is so important that everybody's centered on that one single mission. How do we go it? And it really clarifies that if it's not aligned with what we're trying to achieve, then you gotta consider, why am I doing this? Or it's a distraction, and
Yeah.
it's, staying focused on what's at hand and what we're trying to achieve for the day or even for the week or whatever the case may be, with that, putting those goals, those strategic end states and goals. And it's going to fluctuate, it's going to bounce, but the
Yeah.
idea that everybody has that and reinforced and being able to provide them, did we give them the right tools to
Yeah.
succeed? Did we set them up for
Huge.
success? Did we give them the good guidance? Did we give them the right training? Did we give them the right principles so that they could execute flawlessly to succeed at the mission?
Absolutely. Words of wisdom. That was just so well put. And I hope everyone's taking that to heart. We are out of time on this part, but Mike and I are going to jump into the squad room, continue the conversation. Hi, everyone. It's Jim. We are very excited about one of the many changes coming to the Are We Good podcast. Specifically, you can now, for a limited time, listen to the entire interview. As you know, that second part of each interview has been reserved for members of the Good Squad. But for now, you can hear the whole interview right here. So, part two is continuing in just a moment. And don't forget to hit subscribe, leave us a like, or drop us a comment. We're continuing to grow and need your participation. Thanks, and here we go with part two. Enjoy. We're going to continue with our conversation. I will tell you, if you have not seen the first half, please take time to watch that, because then it will connect better to what we're talking about right now, because we just kind of hit the ground running without any introduction, and we just move right into this. So kind of continuing where we left off, talking about leadership, let's talk about it in terms of crisis management, because that is certainly a very important part of the conversation about violence preparedness and response.
Yeah.
There's crises that occur in organizations. You saw, a massive scale crisis. Kind of give
Yeah.
us your perspective on that.
Yeah, Jim, great question. Because we talked about that in the first session, as you said, and what really comes out in a crisis, there's a couple things. One is the crisis itself and understanding where you are in a crisis. I kind of think of
Yeah.
about it in four different phases. That 911 moment where you're just trying to triage. Then it's that moment of, wow, okay, I think I stopped the bleeding. I got the heart rate going, or but boy, if I don't do this or check this, there's a second and third order effect. For me,
Yeah.
it was, boy, if I didn't get clean water, if I didn't get this, it was a crisis inside a crisis. And then it was kind of like you get to a spot where it's almost like the new normal, as I call it, although it's kind of sometimes overused, but it is a little bit different. You're not back to the original, but things seem to be starting to come back in place.
Yeah.
And then finally is that kind of transition to the next event. And so recognizing those four phases. But the key, I think, in the leadership, and it was one of the ones that my boss brought out to me, was he kind of smiled and he says, "Hey, Mike, we have a bad habit of sending troops places and never getting out. What's your exit strategy?"
Right.
And I looked at him and go, "Boss, I just got here, give me a time." But it was pressing in that as you get through the kind of phase one and phase two, and you're in
Yeah.
phase three, that the idea as a leader, as a team,
Yeah.
you get to help shape how this is going to end. For me, it was arranging things to be able to empower the folks we were supporting to have the right equipment and training to be able to carry on the mission.
Mhm.
As we, the 911 force, left, it was making sure those things were set up successfully. So that was so powerful to think that you get to decide how you're set up for when this crisis ends, and,
Right.
and to be able to do that. So that's very key. But probably one of the big things you talked about, as a leader, boy, what's it like as a leader? And we were operating at a strategic level, and I had folks working the very tactical, triaging patients that come in from this horrific earthquake.
Yeah.
But I would argue that in order to be a good leader, resiliency, I think, is the key for all leaders and for all personnel. And it starts with, if you're going to be a good leader, there's a portion I call self care. You got to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. So you need to be able to know when you've reached your limits. For me, it was I had to go work out. I had to do something, to refresh my mind. I called it my mental health break, but it was me being prepared so that I could be in my best game to lead. But also know when you're starting to go wind down or getting stressed or whatever, is how do you transfer? But that's self care. The other
Yeah.
one, which leads to that second part that I call self awareness. It is, we all have strengths and weaknesses,
Mhm.
and it's making sure we're comfortable with that, and making sure we have people around us that fill in those weak areas that we're all
Right.
about, and kind of making sure. I love this quote that I had, was General George Patton, that said, "When two people are thinking alike, somebody's not thinking." And to me, it's really this idea of this diversity of thought. How do
Yeah.
you surround yourself as a leader to create the environment to allow people to talk up, to allow you to know when they spot something that you haven't, to
Yeah.
be able to alert you, and to be in a safe environment that they're not going to get, their head cut off because they told you something good or bad. And so
Right.
that's self-awareness, and making sure that you know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and make sure you don't have any blind spots to be able to cover it. And then
Yeah.
self-talk. Self-talk is number three, and it's kind of this idea that a lot of times when things are really going south, you kind of like, okay, what did I screw up? Or, you can you self-talk yourself into a bad situation, or you
Right.
self-talk yourself into this is where I'm headed, this is what right looks like, and we're going to be able to do it. And then
Right.
last but not least is, I think the other part of resilience is staying connected
Yeah.
with the team, with friends, with family, and those folks that really ground you to make sure that you're, apart and aware, and also looking out for you and can spot things that you don't necessarily spot because we're all tough and we'll saunter through this.
Mhm.
But
Right,
anyway, those are
exactly.
those are the kind of things. Yeah.
Wow, that is just great. I mean, again, we could probably spend the next hour just dissecting what you said because each of those themes is so important, and I like the one you left it with the family perspective too. Is that
Yeah.
we do need to be grounded, and
Yes.
those are our best support mechanisms for that grind,
Correct.
regardless if you're commanding a massive humanitarian aid,
Correct.
an incident of warfare, or just simply protecting people in your business or responding to that act of violence. I can't stress that enough, and I'm so
Yeah.
glad you talked about that. And
Good.
I want to come back at a future conversation, talk more about that because that
Okay.
is just it's so powerful, and that
Yeah.
resiliency is huge. It
Yeah.
it it really is, and so great stuff. Let's talk for a minute about workplace violence prevention
Okay.
in the military world. But I think a lot of us can kind of understand, and it's probably totally fictionalized, but we see movies all the time. I'm a war movie buff. I love that stuff. And because I was never a soldier, I can't say, well, this is how it really was or is.
Uh,
You have that opportunity having spent your career in the military, in the Navy, so you see it out abroad, in theater, et cetera. Let's talk about domestically, because sadly, there's been some
yep.
incidents that have occurred
Yeah.
on some of our bases, some of our ships, et cetera. Tell me, let's kind of just look, I guess, more from a base perspective. What does the military do, or what's its approach to preventing what really is workplace violence on base?
Yeah. That's a great question, Jim, because I think we look at it, we do some, so I would characterize it in several phases. There's an individual, there's a team, and then there's an organization because the interdependency is like for a base or something like that.
Yeah.
For in a small workspace, it is the awareness, it's the situational awareness. We'll do training, we'll talk about what happens if you have an active shooter or if you have
Okay.
a place of violence and you're trained on that. So we talk about it. Then we actually rehearse it. And then we actually do some training with uh, observers that are experts in the field, almost to film it, to take a look at, gosh, what could we have done better? And again, this after action thing that we talked about in the first segment. So it's this combination of we're going to talk about it, we're going to learn the tactics, techniques, and
Mhm.
procedures.
Mhm.
Then we're going to walk through it, then we're gonna rehearse it, then we're gonna drill it and actually have, a scenario and have a professional observer or, your team, train the trainer type aspect to be able to evaluate
Mhm.
your performance and take notes and then go back in after action and say, what could we have done better from doorstops, from understanding how to announce, how do you go about exiting the space, or how do you shelter in place and to be able to notify others to be able to do that. And so it really starts almost at home that then carries you forward. Of course, the combat zone
Okay.
takes you in a different in a conflict area or an overseas base a little bit different. So each unit trains at its unit level, but then we try to do a bigger scenario with integrating the different parts. One of the things I did at the National Counterterrorism Center under strategic operational planning was what we called these terrorist joint counterterrorist awareness workshops,
Okay.
where we would go to these cities that were having these big significant events,
Mhm.
but we'd have from federal, state, local, tribal, to even the commercial market, the vendors that were a part of this in that city or an event. And we give them this area ahead of time. It was like a Mumbai style incident of a
Uh,
massive attack, and it was so clarifying because And a lot of times, how do they treat? What is their command center procedure? Is the first person on the scene of action commander, and do they take charge? Sometimes it's the medics and the ambulance crew, yet all of a sudden they go to try to save the body, and all of a sudden they're starting to get shot at.
Yeah.
How does that, how do you transition? How do you transition at command and control?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you have the ability to communicate with all the folks at that scale and level, jurisdictional trends, and then to be able to have that command and control coordination and communication that's required to be able to effectively, defeat the enemy, or defeat that action that's causing that harm, and to be able to coordinate and have everybody. It was fascinating what we discovered in those, and then how effective the commercial side is. The telephone guys, the hotel guys,
Yeah.
there's cameras that in some of the locations that you're operating in. The awareness of that and being able to plug into that to be able to identify, the find, fix, and locate this target, or the person or thing that's causing this disruption, and then being able to neutralize it properly and take care of it without harming others. And so, kind of individual team, and then this big organization level, from tabletop to red team to rehearsals to actually exercising, and then evaluating it, rinse and repeat, incorporate those lessons learned that we had,
Mhm.
and to be able to do that, and then to do it at a recurring basis. That it's, hey, this is a great document. Now that I got this, I'm going to sit it on the shelf, and it's going to
Mhm.
collect dust forever. It's that repetitive exercise of how often you do it. It's almost like, okay, how often do I need a flu shot? How often do I need a tetanus booster or whatever?
Right.
Kind of like, okay, what is the right frequency? Because it is impactful. It takes a lot of
Yeah.
resources to do this. But what I learned in the military is that, rehearsing for those casualties, the casualty procedures, and what to do to rehearse them at a frequent basis, ensured, one of the famous things is you get what you inspect, not what you expect. And so
Right.
it's that idea of trading, rehearsal, and verified and evaluating your drills and rehearsals of, from, fires to floods to active shooters to whatever.
Yeah. Boy, I have to say, I feel good. I feel like warm and fuzzy. I know that sounds ridiculous a bit. You're losing your mind again. But what you just said is exactly what we say in civilian world, and to hear that, hey, the
Perfect.
military at this massive level. I mean, the number of service members, the number of bases, ships, you name it, are
Yeah.
doing that. And that's exactly. So again, I think sometimes when we think of, well, there's a very specialized world of military procedures, and then there's civilian world, which is different. Not that it doesn't have an equal amount of procedures and kind of standards and best practice, but they're very different, but they're not in so many ways. And
Right.
you just really laid that out, because as you were talking about everything from the training, the preparedness, to the tabletop, to the after action, and make adjustments as necessary, is exactly what we're talking about in the civilian world
Perfect.
to prepare your team. So now,
Yeah.
folks, you've heard this from the Admiral, that, hey, if the United States military is doing this stepped process, I think we should probably think about doing it in the civilian world. So, not that there aren't great examples. I'm not saying that no one's
Uh,
doing that, but that's what we
yeah.
should take from this for sure. Talking about behavioral threat assessment, is there any type of internal kind of behavioral threat assessment, i.e., let's say a sailor says, I'm concerned about my bunkmate, whatever is appropriate terminology, because their
Right.
behaviors change. They're going down a path. It's just not them. What does that kind of look like for reporting and responding to that?
Boy, that's because I believe that whatever, in our terms, teammate, shipmate, foxhole buddy, whatever you want to
Right.
call it, swim buddy. That person is probably your best, or your family members. That staying connected is that
Yeah.
first line of defense to
Yeah.
deter a significant event or casualty happening. And so it is so important that that you as leaders or the organization creates the environment
Mhm.
that allows that to be properly accounted for.
Yeah.
Um, I used to walk around as the captain of the ship or the admiral, and and sailors would love to talk to your soldier, sailor, airmen, marines, and guardians now to be at Coast Guard, been to be able to tell you what's on their mind.
Right.
And the idea was not to be the alert because it's the first report, but
Yeah.
it is to be cognizant and aware because that individual, that person probably has the best sense.
Yeah.
And you want to be able then to confront it, not overreact, but confront it to really ascertain what is truly going on. And sometimes it's just a, hey, come on in, let's talk. I
Yeah.
see you're a little bit out of whack, and what you can find out from individuals to be able to, maybe they're stressed at home, maybe you know kids aren't doing so well, or the family, the pet, the marriage, the partnership, whatever the case may be. But that idea to be able to do that, and is kind of one of the lines I used in the beginning, is when you learn. I always learn from great leaders,
Mhm.
and I learned from some bad leaders as well, that we always do. But from the good leaders was, if you take care of people, everything else takes care of itself. And
Yeah.
so that touch, um, to be cognizant and aware, as your frontline supervisor and above, to constantly be pulsing your team and your network to make sure that you pick up on those things,
Yeah.
to be that first line of defense that could prevent something from going further. As we see
Yeah.
it, I'm now a board member on a foundation called the Impossible Foundation,
Mhm.
and it's to prevent suicide in special forces and ground
Right.
branch and some other folks. But that, there's so many different techniques out there, and hopefully, you're not resorting to those last resort techniques, that you identified somebody can address the problem quickly, because you never know when that last straw is going to trigger something that's going to cause a significant event in the workplace or what have you.
Yeah.
So it's so vital.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's listening, it's preparing our teams to
Yep.
know when to take action, say something, ask something, see
Correct.
something, say something. All
Yep.
things of when do you respond and how do we respond, I think is so important.
Yes.
I'm going to jump just for a minute here, and again, we could go on for hours, and I want to be respectful of your time, everyone's time. But a couple more questions here. One, let's go back to after action reports.
Okay.
What specific elements of the process should businesses implement following an incident? So, just kind of taking your experience of countless after action reports, from large scale Pakistan to maybe some of the small things that happened on board when you were commanding a squadron or a
Yep.
destroyer, whatever it might be. Sorry if I'm not
Correct.
using the right terminology, but is it what does after action look like? What are some of those questions that should be asked?
Yeah, great question. I would argue that the after action review or report is the most important thing that anybody can do. And it was ingrained in us from the most simple, from a weapons firing exercise on the range. Hey, we're going to rehearse it. We're going to go to range. We're going to do this. This is how the range conducted business. And then after the range time, we all sat down and did, from the very basic to the extraordinary, huge scale. The earthquake relief and the coalition members. We had a after action with the government of Pakistan and all the NGOs, and it was this huge forum
Yeah,
from an individual event, like time on the firing range, or rehearsing a fire, or shooting the guns, or whatever, landing
yeah,
helicopters. After every evolution, it was ingrained to have a sit down, or even it was a few minutes, and it was gathering all the right folks, and I
hmm,
usually went, to the most junior level possible, that was a part of that event, to bring them in to hear their thoughts. And the first couple are really rough, because it's like, what's going on here, and kind of like, and it was the reinforcement again. You as a leader really set the tone that this is a not no shame or blame. This
yep,
is about how did we do it? What happened in the evolution? So the three big questions I'd ask is, okay, what went right? What do we need to continue?
Right.
What do you think went well? What do you think that we could improve on? And then this idea of what happened that didn't. And so I was as a commander or the leader of the team, I was the last one to hear it because I didn't want to influence any of the
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
And then you didn't, it turned, it wasn't like, well, Joey screwed this up. Whoop, stop. Okay, what did Joey or Susie or whatever the case would be, what happened? Well, they weren't. Okay, well, that's a bigger issue, is that they weren't doing the right procedure.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. No, nothing gained by demeaning an individual. So you had to watch that, but you had to understand that a bigger, what was the underlying cause? What was it that caused, maybe that activity to be impacted? So then it was, getting that all out, having that, and then recording those. And now with AI, we could even do it here in this, oh, what did Mike and Jim talk about for the last hour or whatever. Um, but can summarize those notes, but you go back and take a look at it. And then you have accountability that says, okay, these are the things we got to make sure we continue those. But the things that we can improve on, okay, who's going to be responsible? What is it that we're going to improve? How often, when do we think that's going to be fixed? And it might be a personnel issue, it might be a training issue, it might be equipment issue, it might be whatever the case may be, but it is documented so that you go back. And then these were kind of on file, if you have a
Hmm.
checklist with, what got modified, so that the next time you execute, you've learned from it. We're all human. We're all going to make mistakes.
That's right.
Every evolution is going to go. And it's really, even in selection and assessment we did for the most tier one teams, things would always go south every once.
Mhm.
I mean, it just happens, that wasn't, perfect, but it was more important to see how the individuals responded to
Yeah.
that disruption, and how did they approach then the next event to make sure, because we're all human, we're going to make mistakes, but how do how's that mindset to be open to kind of go, oh heck man, I need to do better. That was today, I need to be that much better. The old saying, the only easy day was yesterday.
Right.
Because today I got to be on game on, and it's got to change, and I got to be able to adapt and even do better than I did the day before.
Yeah.
And so it's that full series of candor to allow people to freely talk up. It's truly understanding what went on, what could we do better. It's then the role, to make sure that we do something about it.
Hmm.
Whether it's new equipment, whether it's new process, whether we need to change our tactic, whether or not we need to communicate better,
Hmm.
and then go do it again. Go wrap it
Yeah.
up, because the next day is going to be another challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to unpack from there. And I'm actually going to re listen to this because there's so much to take away from it. So I hope our listeners and our viewers do as well. But there's two things that really stood out, just words. And those for me were candor and junior. Junior being the sense of asking the most junior person. I think a lot of times organizations, when we do those after action reports, we talk to the command level, right? And
Yeah.
I'm kind of translating that into law enforcement or military.
Right.
Command level, CEO, COO, head of security. That's our command level, and we have these conversations that never include the junior person that says,
Yeah.
I was the person on the floor at the time. I'm the person that responded. I'm the person that saved someone's life. We never listen to that. So I'm so glad you said, listening to the junior person as well, all the way on
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And
When I go into these meetings, one of the things that used to drive my boss crazy, because he preferred a smaller group, but I'd always look around the room and say, who should have been here that's not here, to
yeah,
make sure it is. And then it also is prevalent that, we have so much technology. So, when we were in the Joint Operations Center overseas conducting, troops in contact or operations or whatever, we had the capability to be plugged right into the communications. We had
yeah,
overhead watch, whether it was manned aircraft or unmanned aircraft with imagery and satellites, and it was so easy. And so we really had to control yourself that, you're watching and you're kind of like, oh, 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 did they see this? Did they have that? And it was more uh, eyes on, hands off,
Yeah.
because what you just that person on the ground probably had the best sense of what was happening.
Yeah.
And for us to inject like, oh, hey, did you see that, this person's running towards you from the other side,
Yeah.
that you lose that context. It's that person in the ring that's really on it. And
Yeah.
how do you best support that individual to make sure they succeed? And so is
Absolutely.
that and so that's so important in leaders and now today's technology, that you can get down to micromanage or control, or because we get so much information. Well, I would have
Yeah.
done it. Oh, you weren't the individual in that particular
Right.
event that was getting bombarded from other things, or they had a sense of what they were seeing and feeling that
Yep.
could influence that you don't get when you're in an overwatch position sometimes, and
Well
not,
said.
figuring out how to support.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. And the other side of that was just your comment about candor. And I think that that is critical, because if you have your after action reports, your team debriefs, whatever your particular organization calls it, and people do not feel like they can be honest, don't even have
Mm.
the meeting. I mean, like,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if they're just telling you what they think you want to hear, we've moved the needle not even a micro amount.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so that candor, and that's set by you, by the leader of that team, by that organization, so that everyone below you feels that of
Yeah.
he or she is expecting honesty, and it's not about
Correct.
a punitive thing of okay, I'm going to get you on this one because I told you to tell the truth. No, it's we're
Yeah.
trying to be better,
Yeah.
and
And it's
go ahead.
hard at times, and it's like, it's checking your ego at the door, checking your rank at the door.
Yeah,
We purposely, in theater, we have our rank off for other reasons, but,
yeah.
if you had to have something on your collar or your shirt or your sleeve to indicate you were in charge, that's probably not a good environment.
Right,
Everybody
right.
knows who's in charge, but it was the
Exactly.
idea. And then sometimes it was hard to do, is like, I remember coming into a port one time, and that deck seaman, that the most junior guy, was on the ship probably 10 days,
Yeah.
and he's manhandling the lines, and is holding this 10,000-ton destroyer against the winds and the tides up against the pier. And he comes in and he goes, well, Captain, what the, almost like, what were you doing? Why was we, what was, and it was always quite humorous, but sometimes it was also like, okay, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna cut. I need this. You
Yeah.
know, we'll digest it. We'll get after it. Kind of, and a chance to explain more of the why, or this is what I was thinking, or but
Right.
but that feedback was so critical. It was so
Yeah.
wonderful. And
Yeah.
and once it gets moving, that is a self-fulfilling. Then you can watch
Oh
these,
yeah.
because everybody shows up. They're like, hey, watch this. I'm gonna really screw this up today. Everybody comes into work kind of like, I want to be the best I am.
Yeah.
And so how do I do that? And how do I ensure I continue to be the best? So it's just kind of neat.
Exactly. Well, and I think
These are
it's
fun.
absolutely. I think it's checking your ego at the door, in the sense of everyone
Yeah,
knows that you have the stars on the shoulders, you have this or that, right? And it's
correct.
literally kind of checking that. Not that there are times where that is critical and it has to be faced
Yeah,
by everyone or on the forefront of like, yeah, it's ultimately my decision. That's reality. That's the real world. But we can learn from the most junior person, like you're saying,
correct.
the newest seaman on the ship, of hey, I got some feedback for you, Captain. And you sit there going, yeah, because I'm actually the guy who's up in the tower, not the one actually throwing that line or whatever. Good
Correct.
point.
Exactly.
So
Uh,
I totally get that. Well, I'm gonna wrap us up with one more question, if you don't mind.
okay,
And again, I got about 10,000 questions, but I want you back. I hope you come back. But what
I
are
will.
the most critical kind of security blind spots that you observe in civilian organizations compared to military operations? Kind of taking your
Mm,
experience, what you saw in the world, not just domestically, but as you travel
Yeah.
abroad and, thinking back Pakistan, is there anything that you see kind of that the military focuses on that maybe we should take another look at in the civilian world?
Yeah. Um, Great question. I think we can learn from both sides,
Yeah.
both the public and private sector. Sometimes in the military, we were constrained by resources,
Hmm.
where sometimes for some of these family officers, security details, that's not an issue.
Good
Probably
point.
the biggest thing I worry about is I was always worried when I thought everything was going well. I
Yeah.
was like, oh heck, something's gonna something's gonna surprise you,
Right.
and expect the unexpected. To
Yeah.
constantly be on your game, complacency, both in the military and I think in the commercial market. That hey, we've done this, we know we got this, or it's also over reliance on a particular technology or whatever. We
Yeah.
saw, I mean, God forbid, but the Israeli the attack, the Hamas on Israel.
Yeah.
They had all
Yeah.
this technology and guns and whatever. It was defeated with just they had not expected that to be, and so it is understanding limitations. It's constantly
Yeah.
reviewing, and like we talked about, this technology is changing every just so rapidly that it's kind of like, okay, how do we stay ahead of this? How do we
Yeah.
make sure train and drill and think about all the things that can happen
Yeah.
and rehearse it to be able to do that. But I would say that it's equal across, both the military and the civilian. I
Right.
saw it in the folks, and it's, walking the line, it's making sure that frontline individual that's out there, is knows they're being supported, they're given the right stuff, that, we
Yeah.
check on them, we make sure, um, because, we used to call it the strategic corporal, or, that corporal has a car coming at it, that, he's trying to slow it down because it's a checkpoint and they're not stopping because they don't and
Right.
the person then because gets overwhelmed and engages with that causes a humongous event that probably could have been resolved by a different way. And so it's that
Yeah.
idea of just making sure that there's a constant vigilance
Yeah.
that's required from any team to
Yeah.
constantly be its better self day in, day out, that 1% improvement, that idea that things are changing. How do you adapt to it? How do you stay open? How do you test yourself? How do you make sure that you're the best you can be?
So let's use Pakistan as an example. You're focused on a humanitarian effort, but as we talked about earlier on, that there was threats that surrounded you as well.
Correct.
And so it can be so easy, and translating this into civilian world, we're so focused on what we're doing that we're not vigilant as to those threats that exist out there, or
Yeah.
we've let our guard down, right? Because I'm sure there was times even your teams were busy unloading materials that they're going to be distributing, or literally handing it to members of the Pakistani public. And that thought of like, well, could there be someone that's out here to do harm to me, started to fade away,
Right.
right? And so that
Yeah.
vigilance is so critical. And it's really like, don't let your guard down.
Yeah, exactly. We had a phrase for it. It was like risk the force, risk the mission.
Yeah.
And so it was really prevalent. Like here I was on a humanitarian, and I just came off an operation where my Marines were ashore helping in the southern Philippines. And w- we were in a highly contested environment. And so they were all kitted out.
Mhm.
And so when I went into Pakistan and some of the areas and some of the culture,
Mhm.
I felt this is humanitarian assistance. For us to be totally kitted out probably wasn't. And
Mhm.
so I had a really interesting conversation with my boss, General Abizaid, and Admiral Nichols, that said, "Here's what I'm thinking. They need to engage with the local civilians, and so they're going to be more tired in a normal gear to be able to assist. I
Yeah.
will have protection if needed, but this was the image. So the risk of the mission was we looked like we were in a combat zone when it was a humanitarian relief. Yet we were in a high threat environment.
Mhm.
So how did you make sure? Where did you have your teams out to get a sense of the environment to make sure that they were safe? We had host country support and being able to do it. We had some of the elders. I talked to some of the elders in the villages that, you're here to save me and we're going to protect you. That almost tribal nature of how they
Mhm.
did it. And so there was actually an event where they came to me and they said, my team, and said, "Hey, today, why don't you stay? We're okay. We can last." And they had insight that there was some inappropriate activity that was going to potentially happen, and they didn't want us involved in it because they saw us as helping them. And it was just really
Wow.
fascinating. But it's that type of understanding the environment, not overreacting. It's such driving high speed through a village with the horn, the sirens because we thought we were under attack and
Yeah.
things would go wrong versus. And so it's being able to evaluate that risk and make sure your behaviors and your procedures align with the environment that you're operating in.
Words of wisdom. Admiral, this has been spectacular. I want to talk more. I'm sure all of our listeners and viewers are sitting there thinking, okay, Jim, don't end it yet. There's still more to talk about. Well, we'll be back again with Mike for sure because there's just
I would love
great,
that.
great conversation. And I hope all of you that are listening or viewing this have really got all that I've gotten out of this. This has been just enlightening, fun, interesting, great stuff. So, Admiral, thank you for being here today. I so appreciate your time.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Jim. This is fun.
Hey,
Always sharing because it's the future. These are the people that are going to be the leaders in the
that's
future.
right.
So
Yeah,
what can we learn from?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I always kind of remind everyone is, in every one of these conversations, there's morsels of information that are relevant to everyone in every organization at every level. There's stuff we talk about that, hey, maybe it's more at the executive level. There's stuff we talk about at the junior level. But translate into your world, I think is so important. So I want to say thank you to everyone else for your time in listening to this. And don't forget BolanteNET for anything we can do to support you in your mission everywhere from threat assessment to de-escalation skills to testing your systems. The Admiral had talked about the importance of, tabletops and testing your systems. That's what we do as well. So don't hesitate to get a hold of us at info@Bolante.net. And thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Admiral. And don't forget that most important question, as always, before disaster strikes: are we good?